Hey everyone, it's me, Christine Job of Flourish in the Foreign, the podcast that celebrates, elevates, and affirms the voices and stories of Black women living and thriving abroad while exploring living abroad as a pathway to wellness. Welcome if you're watching on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, all those good things. Thank you so much for stopping by today. So, today we are going to be talking about financial wellness while leading a global lifestyle. I have again my guest extraordinaire, Lisa R. Mitchell. If you have not listened to her episode on the podcast, what are you doing? She dropped so many great gems. It's actually one of the episodes that I get a lot of feedback still from because people their minds are blown because she really laid down the law and made a lot of people think about some things that they hadn't really thought about for their finances. So, let me tell you a little bit more about Lisa and then we'll bring her on. So, Lisa is an innovative, vision driven global executive, global speaker, consultant, and writer with over 20 years of experience in sales, marketing, and business development in the United States, Europe, and Asia. She has held senior leadership roles in banking, financial services, and global education industries. Lisa has worked at Citibank and managed a multi-million dollar international banking business at Wells Fargo and has worked in China, where she gained a reputation as a highly sought after corporate trainer and business coach, delivering leadership, cross cultural, and soft skills training to the senior managers and global executives in the APAC region. International personal finance for people living a global lifestyle, which is all of you, has always been a core focus for Lisa. She has contributed to Huffington Post, expatexchange.com, Global Mobility Magazine, and spoken at expat and global mobility conferences around the world, and is a frequent guest on podcasts like Flourish in the Foreign, and has traveled to over 30 countries. She has lived in London, Shanghai, Ho Chi Minh City, and studied Spanish, French, Japanese, and Mandarin. And if you didn't think that was enough, Lisa has obtained an MBA with a focus on international management in Asia from Thunderbird School of Global Management and a BA in political science from the State University of New York at Albany. Yes. And Lisa is also a licensed New York real estate salesperson and a certified blockchain expert. Okay. So when I tell you Lisa's the real deal, she really is the real deal. Okay. And if you haven't listened to her episode of the podcast, go ahead and do that. But without further ado, I'm bringing on Lisa R. Mitchell.
Hey, Christine, how are you? Thank you for having me again. I really appreciate it. I've heard from a lot of people who listened to the podcast and found me, so I'm glad it was valuable. So I'm glad to be back, and I could talk about living abroad and managing your finances forever and ever. So hello to everyone in the Flourish in the Foreign community and the expat digital nomad and just plain living a global lifestyle.
Well, thank you for coming back and
Oh, it's no problem. I love it. I love
thank
it.
you so much for being a wonderful guest. Like I said before, your episode has been one of the ones that has had the most consistent feedback. I mean, I think we published your episode last year. I mean, I think October, September, and people still message me being like, wow, I had not considered these things because, you know,
Great. That's great.
you, it was fantastic because I think something that we both resonate and we believe deeply in is that it's not about being abroad. It's really about thriving abroad. It's about handling the business of living abroad. And your questions and your insight that you gave so freely on the podcast has helped so many people I know
Oh, I'm
because
glad to hear that. I'm glad because that was always my goal. So
yes.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that you have given me a platform because everybody knows the book is taking forever. I mean, I feel like I'm giving birth to 10 children. And who reads anyway, right? I mean, I don't mean it like that, but people, it seems like it's much better if I can have platforms like this. And you had asked me earlier, what have I been doing since? I still have my seminars, but I've been moderating on Clubhouse a lot. People have asked me to speak at conferences. And as long as that gets the information out and people can ask their questions and they learn something, I'm fine with that. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that to me, I'm glad that it resonates with a lot of people and people are messaging you and saying that they didn't think about that, they didn't know that. That's great. That's good. That's good. I'm happy about that.
I mean, I think your voice is so necessary. It's something that we talked about, I think, when we first met each other, was that, because I think we first got in contact last summer.
Yes,
And,
I think so.
that was the time when George Floyd happened and the Blagsit movement really became a
That's
thing.
right. That's
And
right.
people were, willing to leave the states and with a
People had
hobo bag on a
man.
stick and take the next train out. And it was very strange
No
and
plane, train out. Right, right. Yeah.
right. And
It's
it,
true. It's true.
yeah, and I was just horrified and I was very scared for people because I just thought I understand the fear, I understand the desire to go, but the whole sustainability factor was so it was missing. And I think in a lot of not a lot, but there are some platforms that are just kind of focused on go out, go out, go out, leave, 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 and not actually do it in a sustainable manner. And that makes me nervous for sure. So let's
I,
actually go ahead.
No, no, I like what you said, and I heard the same thing, and it's interesting. A couple of people who messaged me from listening to your podcast, their quote, they focused on my quote. The grass is not always greener, just another shade of green in a foreign country. And that's something that someone told me. A taxi driver told me that, I think the second time I moved to London. He was like, the grass is not, yeah. And it's interesting that that's what people held on to. And you're right. People, there are lots of people that talk about living abroad and talk about digital nomad. Very few people talk about finances, and I mean very few. And they tend to focus only on taxes and
Mhm.
investing. And those are two very important things. But as I always said from the beginning, there's a lot in between that. There's a lot. And I'm glad that you really, really, I love that you really focus on sustainability. And one thing that, that's kind of changed since we last spoke is I really, really focus now on the three phases of living abroad, which are pre departure, arrival, and repatriation. And repatriation could be back home, or repatriation could be back to your next country. So, but I'm really glad you always, I read all your stuff, you always focus on thriving and sustainability. And that's true because no one ever talks about the people that come home or they chuck it. They just give it after, oh, this is not working for me. I'm coming home.
Yeah, I mean, you as you know, because we're in a lot of the same Facebook groups, people like to blame countries for
Mhm.
their poor planning. They like to blame, oh, Colombia is not that great or whatever is not that great. These countries have been existing and people have been living there and liking it. Now, if it's a personal taste thing, okay,
Yeah.
but some of the conversation that's had is like it's your poor planning. Like you didn't know you had to have a visa to emigrate to some place. Like what are you talking about?
Know
So
that you couldn't move money easily. Okay. But, those are legit. I mean, we have between the both of us, we have tons and tons of stories. But yeah, you're right. You didn't know you needed a visa and or you didn't do your research. But I mean that's right. I like what you said though. People blame countries. I never really thought about it. Yeah, I do see a lot of that. Yeah, I do see a lot of
so let's get started with some tips that you can share with the audience about pre-departure.
that.
How do you prepare yourself for financial wellness or how do you get financially well during pre-departure?
Okay. So, I'm really big on having some kind of financial blueprint, which actually I kept talking about, and I said, well, I'll just develop my own. So that has changed since we last talked. Creating a financial blueprint that takes you through the steps pre-departure. So you have your checklist, right? So if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So what kind of expenses? So figuring out first of all that you're going to be managing your finances in your home country and your new foreign host country. And a lot of people don't really think about that. I had someone message me. I was on in some Facebook group. She was moving abroad, asking me advice, and just they were asking advice, and I said, "Well, how to manage your finances?" She said, "Look, I'm 50 years old. I know how to manage my finances." I'm like, that's great that you know how to manage your finances between countries. You understand about foreign currency. You understand about moving money internationally. You understand about your new expat tax obligations. Um, you've talked to a financial advisor before you left. It's great that you've done all those things. Can you share those things with us? Never heard from her again. All right, everybody in the group was like, "Oh, that was great." So having a blueprint, figuring out what are going to be your, like I said, home and host country expenses, your potential. Like I did a podcast with someone in France, and she told me that even if you rent an apartment in France, I think you're still responsible for the property taxes. I wouldn't
Mm.
know that, right? So doing your research, looking at cost of living, things like what is it, expatistan? There are a couple of them, but I always tell people when it comes to cost of living, always do it with a grain of salt. My other thing I always talk about pre-departure, I'm really big on consultations. Get a consultation with a expat tax professional, someone who's lived overseas, and I like someone who's, ask them who their clients are. There are some big names out here that have these little expat tax divisions that don't know, people are starting to complain about them. So I'm really big on a consultation. Most of them give free consultations or work that into your budget. Also, the same thing for an expat finance person. The rules and regulations around taxes, excuse me, around investing, and that's something since we've last talked, we last spoke. You're hearing about more and more. I'm hearing a lot of people in these FI groups, financial independence. They want to invest. A lot of times you cannot, for the most part, U.S. citizens really have, if you want to invest, like let's say I want to buy a mutual fund in France, there are a lot of restrictions around that.
Yeah.
Even I didn't know a lot of these restrictions when I moved overseas the last time. So you really want to sit down and speak to an investment manager pre-departure. And a lot of I gave a seminar a couple months ago. One thing someone asked, they would do, this is when the whole GameStop and Robinhood, people were talking about this. So a lot of people were jumping on it. And she asked a question. She's like, well, I'm moving to blankety blank country. Will I be able to do options and things like that? That's a good question. Most of the things like options, which are derivative, they're banned in other countries.
Mm.
So first of all, there are two issues. Okay, so what are you using an app to do your trading? How are you doing your trading? Is that app going to work in the foreign country? Right? Because it may not, right? And you need to figure that out pre-departure. You do not want to get to blah 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 country. And this actually happened to it's happened to me. A friend of a friend. We were in China. She's like, "Oh my God, I tried to trade on." I'm like, "This is China. You think that big brokerage company is going to let you trade even with the VPN? It might be hard." So that's something to think about. So I'm really really big on those two big consultations. And then I always say have one with the immigration officer as well. The immigration rules we know are changing. There's so many remote visas out there. So many remote programs. If I was really interested in a few countries, I would sit down and look at because immigration is changing every day in these countries. So those are some of the things that I would do. I mean, those are kind of core figuring out what your expenses will be. And my other thing, what are your sources of income going to be?
Mm.
Right. So when I used to give my seminars, I always talk about the two big things: immigration, which now, I mean, the only silver lining from COVID is a little bit easier. Most countries are tripping over themselves and killing themselves to have a digital nomad visa or to have because you may have heard me say this. These countries are not in love with you. They're in love with your money,
Yes.
honestly. I mean, Spain is redid theirs. Portugal, I was just on a call with Portugal about Portugal and investments. People are salivating. These countries are in love with your cash, with your steady income, pension, social security. not so much in love with you. So keep that in mind. And the other thing I like to remind people, again, this has kind of changed since the last time we spoke. You know what, and I think you've spoken about that. What's your intention?
Mm,
Are you moving abroad because it's cheap, it's cheaper, or lifestyle? And I said this probably before we spoke. The bill for COVID is going to come due. And I see it coming due in a lot of countries. I see these countries as they renew immigration and their rules, it always has a tax component to it, as
yeah.
in you will be paying more taxes. So when you're talking about sustainability, I agree with you 100%. Look at the taxes. A lot of them are they tax Social Security. Now there are global tax treaties and things like that. But I just like for people to keep in mind, why are you moving abroad, especially for the money aspect? Is it because it's cheap, right? Oh, this is a cheap country, and then me, the business person banker, I go, why is it cheap? Right? And people go, oh, I can get a $5 manicure and housekeeping for $2. Why? And also, too, do I want to live in a country like that?
Yeah.
I know it sounds kind of weird, but I was very cognizant of that when I live a lot in Asia, and there's always a lot of haggling, and I'm like, do I want to pay the person who's cleaning my house $3 an hour? Is that I don't there's this
Yeah.
also this whole thing you're hearing now about expats and digital now nomads, like we're doing all the gentrification in these countries. So those are the things, your budget, thinking about home and host country finances, thinking about the core things, opening a bank account in a foreign country, what documentation you're going to need, um, how are you going to move money, foreign exchange? I mean, for some people moving abroad, this may be the first time that they've ever dealt with foreign currency. How are
Mhm.
you going to get paid? And your sources of income, and in what currencies those are going to be. And currency volatility is always a big one. And taxes, because there's apparently, for in the US sense, still a lot of people are fighting for residency based taxation. People think that it happens. So there may be a lot of change. This is now we're entering kind of post COVID. A lot of things will be in flux, but those are kind of the big things that I have try and tell people to think about.
Yeah. I am definitely one of those people that is on the bandwagon of residency based taxation for the United States because, you know, um, we have to pay taxes or we have to file taxes,
Right,
obviously, as Americans abroad. And we don't have representation as a collective. And also, everyone was like, the United States is hoarding all the vaccines, but they were not giving any vaccines to private citizens abroad at
right,
all. Only, civil servants, military, people in the embassy. And I actually did hear of one woman that was able to go to a military base, and I think it was in Qatar, that
mm,
she was able to get vaccinated. But that has not been overwhelmingly the experience. And so it's kind of like, what are you paying for? But until that happens, it's something that people have to think about, right? And also, as you said, and I'm so glad you brought this up, that COVID is changing a lot of things. Now, a lot more countries are having digital nomad visas that you will pay your taxes on the front end, so they get their money.
absolutely,
um, and require you to have private health insurance, which I think is completely fair. But
right,
also, I think a lot of people don't think about, residency. You will have to pay a residency tax regardless of if you make your money in the country or not. Oftentimes, you have to pay something if you were there
hmm,
for more than 180, 183
right,
days. And a lot of people don't think about that. And
right.
I'm hoping people start to do so. I wanted to bring up something that I think you may have seen this in a group. This is a couple of months ago. Um, it was a discussion of a woman. It was one of those threads that people are like, "How do you go abroad?" And I have student loans, and someone said something to the effect of, "You don't have to pay them when you're abroad." And then someone else said, "Oh, I had a friend who took out a massive loan and left the United States and was like, peace out. I'm never gonna return to the United States again. And it created a firestorm because people were like, "What are you doing? What are you even talking about?" And it's always the friend of friends, and I'm like, "Who are these people?"
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna put that to you. If you didn't see that in that Facebook group,
I didn't I
what
didn't
would
I didn't see that one. Let me give you two things. And this is one I had another friend who alluded to what I think may be one issue, which I'll discuss. And I need to follow up with her actually. With the foreign earned income exclusion, right? If you make under that,
Mhm.
right, then I guess there's no tax, right? No tax, so it looks like you have no income. I think that's what a lot of people are alluding to, and what a
Okay.
lot of people are trying to do. I think I'm from some of the things that I've seen, the foreign earned income exclusion. I'm glad you brought that up because I get into actually I've gotten into fights with people who think it's you move overseas it's automatic. No, you need to meet two requirements to do it, which I always forget. One is you must be, I believe, a resident of that country. Prove that you're a resident of a foreign country. And the other one is the 330 days outside the U.S. And actually, I see a lot of expats, and I would probably do this when I move again. They do the foreign tax credit because it's just easy. Taxes in other countries are higher, and they just do it, and they keep moving. I can't be. I mean, doing the whole hundred. Like right now, I have elderly parent. I can't be like writing down how many days I'm here in the I think it works for certain situations, but people get fixated on it. You're right, Christine. The other thing is the United States and other countries post COVID, even pre COVID, are going to be on the hunt for money. Okay. In every way. As a matter of fact, I just sat in on one group and they were talking about RBT, resident based taxation. And they were talking about the groups that they're now focusing on is expats. No surprise there. IRS has had a year. It's just like anything else, right? When I was a banker, when I was a business manager, and I need money, I go, oh wait a minute, let's see. Look, let me look at my customers. Where am I getting the most money? Where can I leverage? It's really not different. So this whole idea of outrunning and then something outrunning the U.S. government is just ridiculous, and especially one thing I have consistently heard from a lot of these expat tax professionals, and I sit in on all the seminars and things, is that the relationship and the sharing of information abroad between tax authorities, the U.S. government, like we have like the with FACTA and all that, it's only becoming closer, right? It's only becoming closer, and especially if the U.S. It becomes more and more giving reciprocity to these countries. So the thought that maybe the U.S. government won't find you, or the student loan people may not find you, maybe today, but maybe not tomorrow. So I don't know, I think that's kind of a dangerous game. But yeah, I didn't see that. I've seen a couple. I tend not to read those because I think because I think and then I'll put in my 2 cents about like that's not. But seriously, the foreign earned income exclusion one that actually kind of might have some like. Let me go in further because I think if you don't have any taxable income, the idea then with your student loans, people are not paying them. I think they're deferring them. They're doing like one
Mhm.
of these income repayment plans and things like that. And I mean, that's the legitimate. The student loan people allow you to do it. So I think technically that one might be all right. But that's interesting. We got to talk more about that one when we do a
Yeah.
follow up. We'll do we'll or I'll do a blog post or something on that one. That's I didn't know. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
we'll definitely have to do a follow up, especially when you launch your book. We'll definitely do another
We're gonna
chat
do
because
yeah.
this
That's a
information
good
is
one.
always needed for
Yeah,
sure.
that's a really good one. And this friend of mine, she's I think she's has some COVID or she's not feeling well, and I need to follow up with her. But one to go one interesting. That's the things people are talking about. See, that's the thing
Yeah.
people are focused on, and I'm like, I wouldn't focus on that if I were going abroad. I would focus on how am I going to open a farm bank account? What are going to be my sources of income? How I'm going to, but maybe that's one of their sources of income, a student loan.
Uh, I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll see.
who am I to
We'll
judge?
see.
Yeah, yeah.
I just want to thank everyone who is watching. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions for Lisa about personal finance while living a global lifestyle, go ahead and put it in the comments and I will pose it to Lisa. If you have any other questions about living abroad, moving abroad at all, you can also do that. Lisa has lived in London and throughout Asia, so she has that covered. And I am based in Spain. So, if you have any questions about that, go ahead and put that in the comment section. And let's keep it rolling. I want to talk about now what are some of the things people need to do um, to actually remain financially well? Because this is something that we've talked about. People don't think about when you're abroad. How do you sustain this wellness?
Mhm.
How do you actually live and thrive financially? What are some of the things you need to be cognizant of and have some like action plans? What are some of those things?
Good. That's a good that I like what you said about action plans. Actually, in my work, it's interesting in my workbook, the section that talks about arrival um, has you now that you've arrived, right? And you know what your actual expenses are going to be in the new foreign host country, and you have your home country. Do another budget, right?
Mm,
Now that right, maybe the country you moved to is like France, where you have to pay property taxes, or maybe I got to China and I realized I had to pay my own for the health check. Some countries have a health check. I was like, okay, nobody told me this. But on the other hand, I didn't ask. And there are always going to be, Christine's things that that's part of the journey, right? That you just don't know. So as soon as you find out these things, you should do another kind of budget. And also in the pre-planning phase, always add a slush fund of 20 to 25%, so that once you get abroad, for these unexpected things. So once you get there and you have your budget and you know how much things may cost, right? And hopefully, just like in pre-departure, you've put in your savings, right? Savings should be first. Hey, I didn't always do that either. So, and then the other thing is people still forget about not only savings, but retirement, things like that. Also, once you get to the country, maybe, sometimes when you move to a foreign country, maybe you might have known things like I kind of knew about some taxes and investment things, but when you move to the country, things could have changed, but you realize what you can and you can't do, right? So also too, when you move finally to the country, it's going to become really, really clear quickly if the cost of living things are really true. And like someone always says, it depends on what your lifestyle is, right? Me, I like to live in big cities. You'll never find me in some small town trying to save money. That's just kind of not how I roll. Now, I believe in being frugal but extravagant, so I can live in a big city and not spend lots and lots of money. But like for me, I don't like living with other people. So living alone, rent, things like that will probably always be a bigger expense for me. So that's something I just have to budget in. And again, multiple sources of income. If you get to the country and you figure, wow, well, I budgeted this amount of money, but I didn't know that this was going to be this expense. That means you're going to have to figure out another source of income. I think one of, again, the great things about, well, one of very few positive things about COVID, remote work, right? And these are things you should investigate pre-departure, right? So when you arrive in the country, this happened to, I was just reading this article about how they were saying that the stimulus money, the United States realized it was a good thing. Surprise, surprise. Income replace, hello, income replace. Well, I think it was like, oh, now giving people cash can be a good policy. Really? Income replacement is always a good thing, right? It's always a challenge. And for me, when I moved overseas, that did happen to me. The job I was working, the place I was working, failed to tell me that, oh, if we don't have enough clients, then you don't. Anyway, Luckily, I had other income, and luckily, I'm always one of those people who always has a side hustle. So I was able to do coaching and things on the side. But during COVID, if I had been there, it would all have to be over the phone, right, or remotely. So I'd say the really great thing, there's so many resources out there for remote work. I always tell people now, when you move abroad, do not depend only on your employer in the country, right? There's tons of story, and that even goes for corporate. Tons of people forget, and I tell my corporate clients this, and I lived through this during the financial crisis in 2008. Companies think about themselves, right? So let's say things get really bad, they need to get out of a country or they need to shut it down. If your visa is dependent on that, what are you going to do? Imagine coming home and saying, by the way, my company no longer exists and we have to leave the country in 30 days. If you have a family, what if you have kids? And that's the other thing that is so great about the digital nomad lifestyle and people living abroad on their own terms. You get to be more independent. I always tell people, do not rely solely on your corporation. Always have multiple sources of income. And if you didn't do that or didn't have that time to do that pre-departure, that's one of the things you should focus on when you've arrived and you've settled in and you're getting kind of the lay of the land. Things can go, haywire in a very, very quickly. The other thing that we didn't talk about was health insurance. That's what we forgot
Mm.
to talk about. I think people also, actually, I just found someone that I wanted to do. People had asked me in my little group if, and my small Facebook group, if we could talk about insurance. And this is something I also said during COVID. First of all, countries are going to require that you're either vaccinated or you can prove that you have insurance. And of course, that did happen. Some of these big digital nomad countries, and rightly so, with some of the first to roll out with that. So, not having insurance is no longer negotiable. So, you need to put that in your budget, find a good plan. And also, once you arrive, if you don't have a global plan, I would say look around for local like you said, private insurance, find a broker or something like that. I think that's becoming more and more important and a game changer. Trying to think of anything. I think those are the key. Trying to think of some of the things I have in my workbook, but that's a big one. Is once you arrive, is this budget that you've created? You should definitely rework it because there'll be a lot of new things.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you brought up insurance because I actually was just talking with on I think on Instagram with Adelia of Picky Girl Travels, and she was saying she lives in Mexico, and a lot of people who go to Mexico, because of the cost of healthcare, they don't even bother to get insurance because they're like, I'll just pay it all out of pocket. But
Hmm.
now with COVID, if something happens to you, I think this was just for COVID, but maybe perhaps for anything.
Yeah.
One, you had to pay up front, and for COVID, it was like 5,000 USD, which is a lot of money when you consider it in Mexico. They were like, we don't know how long you're going to be here. We don't know how much it's going to cost. You're going
Yeah.
to pay this cash up front. And so I think it's so important for people to have a global plan or a local plan, or maybe both, depending on how much you travel and things like that, to have coverage when you travel. So I think thank you so much for bringing that up because I think that is super crucial. I
Yeah.
did want to bring up one other thing before we start talking about the things you need to have in place when you repatriate or go to the next country, which was, and we talked about it on the podcast, which was having, I forget how you worded it, but having an intercultural marriage or international marriage
Oh,
and how that might,
right. Sometimes they call it cross-border intercultural family. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Multicultural families, cross-border relationships. Yeah,
mhm,
yeah,
and how that may affect your financial wellness. Because, one of the questions I always get asked on the podcast in some kind of flavor is always about dating abroad. So people are like, I want to be partnered, which I think is perfectly fine, but
yeah.
there may be some implications if you do not find, your partner to be of the same nationality as you are. So what are some of those things that we need to look out for?
Yeah, that's a huge issue. I know some couples who've gotten married who get into fights, especially when they have children, because if you're, what is it? If the parent, one parent is American, then the child was it automatically American? That's where you get also these accidental Americans, right? I'm an American.
Mm,
My mother is American, and my father is American. I didn't ask for it. Um, those can get tricky. Those could, I mean, now that's some. I've sat on in seminars and stuff about that, and I'm writing the retirement investment chapter. That's some tricky stuff in terms of leaving money, gifting, estate, social security, pension. Most of my friends, and I think I said this before, that are married to foreign nationals, everything is separate. Their lovely foreign national spouses are like, I don't want the United States IRS involved in my, and rightly so. Especially if you're a woman of a certain age or person of a certain age, right? You have a few assets, or you meet this person, they have kids. That opens everybody up to the scrutiny of the United States. Most people, they keep everything separate, and that's probably something that I would do. I don't want my new spouse partner subjected to FACTA if they don't have to. But it's also left a lot of American spouses, and this is when people were talking about FACTA. I remember this. I did a presentation for a women's group. They're raising kids. They don't work. Their only income comes from their spouse. The spouse is like, I don't want to be on a joint bank account with you. Sometimes in some countries, you can't even get a joint bank account, which I didn't even know until I moved to China. So where's your money coming from? What again? What are your? I did a podcast with someone, and they support expat spouses, and okay, where's your money coming from? That if something again goes bad, which could happen, abuse or any kind of, where's your money, right? So I always tell people make. I've met. This is even before I thought about writing a book or whatever. Whenever I'm on vacation, foreign country, whatever, and invariably a woman finds out I'm a banker and they're like, well, I travel with my husband, it's usually women, for 30 years and he left me for some little chickie somewhere. I don't have any money. I don't have any money. I don't have my own visa. I gave up everything. He controls no, you don't want to be in that position. You always want to have your own. But for foreign, it's really the rules are really tricky about how much, you really, that's one of the things you need to do is sit down and do some estate planning before you get married if you're going to get in a relationship. But most of my friends, yeah, they keep things separate. um their spouses don't, and I understand that you have nothing to do with America except that you married me. Well, you're in a relationship with me. Why should your finances and your business be subject? But that stuff's it's very tricky. It's hard to write about. I sit in these investment things and I go, what? Huh? I need to write really broad strokes. So that is definitely something. If you're going to get involved with a relationship like that, you need to figure out what you're going to do with that one.
and would you recommend having an estate plan in like your home country and in the country that you have
I
permanent
That's another
residency?
really good question. I've heard some investment. Oh no, you can have just one that covers everything. But now I'm hearing more advice that says do it for each country. If I had assets in foreign, I would do it for each country. I would. Because just especially what I know about estate planning, even if you like, let's say you have and this is what I've experienced, a trust or a will, and it covers some assets. Anything outside of that, you still need to do something for it. So, yes, I would. As and again, I'm glad you brought this up. I, I've gotten sick in a foreign country. Like I said, I have elderly parents. I don't know when I'll be traveling. Probably end of December, maybe January. I won't travel ever again, and even for outside the United States without having my will or a trust and all those things done, and extra insurance. As a matter of fact, I'm looking for that now. I will never do it again. That's a really good point you made. Yeah, I'd look at both countries. I wouldn't just do the U.S. and say, oh, it'll cover everything. Law like as I'm reading, and you're a lawyer, Christine. What is that law? I can't remember it. The two different laws, and in some countries you can only leave your assets to blood relatives. I can't remember.
Oh, like for like to bequeath things
Any
and
kind of
this,
your property, like you can only leave it anything, I think.
well, like yeah, like a state law. So when
Yeah, you can
you,
only leave it to a blood relative. So you can't
wow,
leave
that's
it. I can't.
interesting.
I will find it because I just was reading about it like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, oh my god. Um, how am I going to explain this in the book? And I will send it to you. Yeah, you could. The rules of the country. And then some countries you can, like, I used to ask this all the time in China, and they were like, it all goes to the son.
Well, there you go.
It all goes to the male heir, and that's it. But yeah, I can't remember the differences between my notes. Yeah, you can only bequeath, leave it to a blood relative. You cannot leave it to anybody you want to. That's a game
Yeah.
changer. That's pretty different from what we're used to.
Yeah, and inheritance law and inheritance tax is different.
Mm,
So I think it's so important for people to really do that estate planning in both countries so that
absolutely.
they can have the appropriate legal
Yeah.
entity or vehicle to be able to pass on that asset.
Yeah.
Hopefully, usually with the least amount of tax.
Oh, absolutely. And
So
legal, sorry, you're a lawyer, but what, you don't want it all to be in probate and all held up, and you want your heirs to be, well, you want your heirs to be able to use, whatever, well, and also your wishes, right?
mhm,
You don't want something subject to just, oh, it's the law in, I don't know, the Netherlands, right? Without, but that's pretty important. And hey, I'm was team. I never did any of that before.
yeah.
Um, so I'm just as, as this is, I always tell people when people ask, what should I do as well? It depends on what phase you're in. If you're moving abroad when you're in early 20, I didn't think about this stuff at 21. You're moving after 40, or moving, you want to semi-retire, or, but, your assets change, your financial situation changes, and you should think appropriately for that.
Yeah, but I agree with you. Like when I went abroad, I didn't have these things, but I think the thing is that if you have assets, or if you have assets, or even if you have liabilities, like you should maybe
Mhm.
have some life insurance to cover all of your expenses. Most insurances, well, I'll speak for Spain. My health insurance has to cover repatriating my body. So if
Oh, okay,
like
that's
what I
good.
mean, you have
That's
to think of
good.
you have to think about those things. And if you have some outstanding student loan debt or any other kind of liabilities, have some life insurance in which to cover those costs. Have an estate plan so people don't need, if you don't want your body to be repatriated, be like, don't repatriate your body, cremate it, and do what you need to
Right,
do in country.
right. Because
You know,
repatriation is expensive. It's extremely expensive.
It is. And I think it's just something that we all have to think about. And I think, of course, people avoid thinking about it even when they're in their home country because it's
Mhm.
morbid and they think it's going to jinx them for some reason.
Oh, wow.
But the thing is that if you really want to live sustainably, if you want to thrive abroad, then you put your ducks in a row
That's
and
right.
you have these things in place and you have a plan. Because I think COVID has taught us anything can happen at
Mhm.
any age and any place in the world at a blink of an eye. And so we have to think about those things and just have our ducks in a row as much as possible.
Right. As you said before, I love sustainability and, really, preparing. No one wants to speak about repatriation of remains or getting sick in a foreign, people getting sick in a foreign country. That's another thing. Happens a lot more often than people think. And I'm glad that Spain's insurance covers repatriation of remains. Usually you have to buy, from a US standpoint, other insurance, or there are other companies, crisis management companies that do it. This is, again, Christine, it's not just Poor Planet where I said cheaper. That's an expense.
Mhm.
Some people, like I talked to, they don't want to pay. When I listen, this, okay, these are the expenses. They don't, they went to, I want to move to blah, blah, blah country, and it's going to be cheaper. And I don't want to hear about all the other kind of stuff. And then that's when you get into, when, because like, in Spain, it's mandatory, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
part of your
yeah.
visa process.
Right,
Unless you are a citizen,
right,
your insurance has to cover repatriating your
yeah,
body, and insurance that covers, there's no co-pays. So like you gotta pay for
right,
everything.
right. And people, you're right. People, again, oh, I just want cheap, geographic arbitrage, and it's so cheap, it's cheaper. You know, my thing, if it's free, it'll cost you. And there are no free lunches. So, and especially now, the bills for COVID. And I see a lot of stuff coming out like Spain. And people, I see a lot of people now saying, why are people saying Portugal is cheap? It's not cheap. And I see also, I think it's also I think they made some changes to their visa as well, just like other countries are, where the money has to come from I think, and I'm speaking mostly from our U.S. folks now as well. People don't understand there's a cost to all that. It's not universal health care. It's not necessarily free.
It's not free. You
Yeah,
have
it's
to pay
not.
for it.
Yeah, it's not. And what does Trevor know? It's a social contract. People in other foreign countries have agreed, right? Look at Norway or Sweden. They pay taxes up the. They will pay, and this is what they will get. In the United States, we seem to be kind of fuzzy on that, right? We don't want to pay. We don't want to socialize this. We don't want to, it's in other countries, healthcare is a right. And now the other big one, housing,
Mm.
right? Other countries, housing is a right. In the United States, we tend to monetize everything. But I knew this was coming with the insurance, because you're already starting to hear those stories of people go, they don't pay their bill. I got sick in China. I paid my bill, but there was a portion because I wanted to leave the hospital after 10 days. I was like, I'm getting out of here. And there was a lag in when I could move the money. They took my passport. Not that they didn't already have that data, right?
Yeah.
They know where I work. They know who my employer, who's sponsoring my visa. Um, I've even heard of cases where people skip out paying their bill and they find you. I think people are used to, in the United States, we have freedom. Other countries, it's not the same, right?
No, Israel will stop you at the
Oh yeah,
border. They won't
Israel will
let you
stop you at the
leave.
border. Yeah, Israel will stop you at the border. A lot of the Middle East is like you can't. And we didn't. I forgot the thing we didn't talk about was credit.
Mm.
You can't have these debts. People, U.S. citizens should keep their eye on credit in the United States. Well, first of all, pre-departure, you should check your credit report at annualcreditreport.com. Now they're letting people during COVID do it weekly. But there are going to be some changes. Number one, the new administration, Biden Harris, they'd already supported a whole national credit bureau system. Hopefully, that's going to take off. The other thing, I think it's going to take off. Big banks, about what, 2 weeks ago, announced that they're going to be looking outside of credit scores and giving people. That's a game changer because the reason these companies are public and it's American your credit score is because the banks buy into it and the
Yeah.
banks buy the data and they use it. Now the banks are saying, we don't want, we can look other way. That's going to be a game changer. But you should keep your eye on your credit. Most people don't know your U.S. credit score does not travel. The U.S. credit history does not travel. But I also see that changing. I think data exchange has worked in some areas. It's worked for taxes. I keep thinking, why can't it work for credit?
Mm.
So we may get to a point where it might. But for repatriation, people forget credit is also important. People don't watch their credit when they're living abroad. Then they come back. Maybe they come back for a couple of months, whatever, or come back, or interest rates are really low in the US. So some people living abroad are like, hey, I want to buy property. They realize someone else is using their credit history. Identity theft is rampant when you live a global lifestyle, or they realize their credit has taken a hit, or they realize finally their credit score in blah 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 whatever country doesn't mean anything, or they've developed a thin file, and yes, maybe they're making millions living in Portugal, but maybe it's in euro, and the United States, credit bureaus can't read that, so they're in a, either they have to use cash or they have to find another means. So it's important to keep your eye on your credit report for sure, and your credit.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to go back to something you mentioned
Mhm.
about, social contracts. I think in the American sensibility is we want everything for very cheap.
Mhm.
And we don't really see value in a lot of things. And I think that's why people go abroad, they want to go somewhere cheap, cheap, cheap. I won't say everyone, but it's a theme,
It
which
is.
is which is
Geographic arbitrage, isn't that the digital nomad thing, right?
yeah. But I also think that people are setting themselves up because what is cheap and what does cheap mean
That's
to
what I said.
you? And because they don't have a blueprint or a budget or a financial vision for themselves or their family, they don't really know what cheap actually would mean and
Yeah,
what does cheap actually do for them, how they be able
I
to
agree.
leverage that. And so they go to Portugal. Portugal is not a brand new gem. The Brits have
I
been
love
in
that.
Portugal. So
Yeah,
therefore, if
that's right.
the
That's
Brits are
right.
there, so that means property prices have already gone up.
Mhm.
So I don't know what people thought they were going to get in Portugal. And again, we all have different definitions for what cheap is, which is what
Yeah,
that's my biggest pet peeve in these Facebook groups.
I agree with you
Don't say
150%.
like, yeah, like what is a cheap country? What is your budget? And we can tell you that
What's
because
your
what I think is
lifestyle?
exactly.
What's your you gonna be eating ramen and hey, I don't judge, but I agree with you 100. What's your lifestyle? Like I said, I'm not living in a small town.
Mhm.
I'm not like I always joke I've lived in all the big cities except I think Tokyo and Moscow. I'm not doing that. And also the social contract. What do you ever ask yourself why it's cheaper? Why are you getting a $3 manicure? Right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of backlash during COVID against expats and digital nomad. And I'm also seeing that in a lot of groups. Not such a great welcome when we come back now.
Yeah.
Now that they've lived without us for a year, right? And I said this as well, the little economist in me, I say wait until inflation, which expats and digital nomads usually it's inflationary cause and effect, if you will, when you move to these countries, because we always want bigger and better, right? Oh, that's cheap, but I want a Western bathroom. Well, does everybody? Oh, but I want Western plumbing. Oh, and I'll pay for it. So prices rise, rise, rise. But I agree with you. I'm asking people now, what do you mean by cheap? Is it cheap? Is it cheaper? Or you're just moving for a lifestyle? And I think actually, I need to put that in my. I'm going to do like a mini workbook for. I do like a presentation just for moving abroad. You really need to ask. We've all talked about your why and your intention. And I think you're right. People still have start. And hey, after the last year we had with social justice and I can understand people want to head for the exits,
Yeah.
especially with their children, which is a whole other kettle of fish. I wonder about, okay, so everybody's moving with their children and then they're bringing them to these foreign countries. Are they homeschooling them, which you can do in some countries, you can't do in other countries? What effect is that having on the educational system in some of these countries? I wonder, because it can't all be right remote. Um, and you're right, people need to, I'm the same with you, like cheap, cheaper. And then you made a good point. Portugal isn't some new gem, so it'll be cheap. And okay, it's cheap for 3 years, then you move to the next cheap country, and then you move. And some people do. If that works for you, then I don't know. I see this trend. Well, I'll move here. I heard it's cheap. I'll move here. I heard it's cheap. I move there. I heard it's cheap. I don't know. I don't know. I think if that's what you want to do, but even that requires some planning, right? If that's what you want to do, that requires planning for
De-
sure.
definitely. And I mean, we could talk about this all day. We really could
We
because
could,
there's so many things that people just don't think about.
they
And
don't. And
you said,
I only did like the tip of the iceberg about it. But I'm glad that people are responding, and I'm glad that people because I think it's a great time to go if you've never gone abroad to try it because of the visa immigration is really opened up, and that was a
yeah,
key barrier for people. But gotta have the finances, and I don't know. I think it's become more. I didn't think about, like you said, estate planning before and my investments and would I be able to use my favorite app abroad? I didn't think about it. And I think, having been through a couple of, okay, a financial crisis, things always change. One, if I may, since we've last talked, something else I saw trending a lot. Because one of the things that financial institutions do when something like a COVID, something, they always reassess their risk. And
mhm,
what's coming up is the whole having a U.S. address, but you don't live here.
Wow.
That's becoming, people are really, really experiencing a lot. And I said, that when I heard about it kind of a couple months ago, I said, that sounds like banks and that. And then sure enough, and I'm happy to, I think I did share it in my group. Somebody found a section from the, I guess it's some tax law, some regulation. He's in one of these tax groups, and it says, it's one of those laws or regulations that was on the books, but nobody enforced it until somebody reassessed the risk. So now people that are using a lot of these virtual mailboxes, I have one, are experiencing problems. So that's something else to look out for. How we get around it, I mean, we're US citizens, we're entitled to have a US address. I agree with what some of the pundits say. It's more these financial institutions, the people who write the rules and regulations, not understanding that Christine and Lisa are not money launderers. They're living abroad
Yeah.
and they need a US address. We're not money launderers, separating us from the money launderers. Yeah. That's the
Yeah.
part.
And
Yeah.
I feel like right now the American laws are just they just broad brush everyone who's a American citizen abroad. Like we're all money launderers. Like
Yeah.
no, we're clearly not. And if you guys look at our tax returns, you realize that we're not.
Hey, forget tax return. Remember, I used to look at bank accounts. And I go, you look at these expats, and these are corporate mostly, bank
Mhm.
accounts, managing two households or more, at home and host country. No one would think these people are wealthy. Mass affluent, yes. Wealthy, no. But there are some, a lot of the groups, and I encourage people to look into ACA, American Citizens Abroad, Arrow, a lot of Democrats abroad, a lot of America has always so much on our plates, and expats are at the bottom of the list, to be honest, unless it's for some dollars. We have to, and that's one of the things in one of my, when I have my spare time between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. I'm thinking about, but we just have so much going on, and what the number of people living abroad, it's been 9 million for like 4 years, but trying to get on the attention span of some of these, I sit in on a lot, like I said, on as many seminars as I can about it to be supportive, and so I can share the information, and it's hard. It's they've had some wins, but it's just hard to get on somebody's radar, really.
Yeah.
And like like they said, a lot of these, which I didn't know, rules and regulations are made for corporations, and then not made with individual. And go back to the fact that, what was it, 38% of Americans have a passport. Maybe it's at 39 now. And look at, I always tell these groups, look at who's decision makers. How many of these people working in these organizations even have a passport, or have, forget lived abroad, forget speak a second language? How many of them have even traveled abroad? But I mean, really know what it is to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on an expat tax return for no reason, you don't owe anything, or to want to be able to trade, buy stocks, bonds, and they just don't. They just don't. Some of these groups say we're making headway. I think the average Joe would say it's too slow.
Yeah.
But the only way to change that is to help them and help the change. I would say this. I would say that. Go to their websites. Go. These organizations are working tirelessly. But when I listen to them and they talk about their interactions with Congress, and we just have so much going on. It's a hard one, but there are people working on the behalf, and we need to support. We need to support them and support that. But that doesn't help us when you want to, you want to live abroad, and you have a virtual mailbox, and then you're trying to open a bank account or a safety deposit box, and you can't because the compliance officer thinks that you're a money launderer. It's hard.
Which goes to something we don't have time today to talk about, but we did mention it in your podcast episode, which is people that thought that they are done with the U.S., so they close all bank accounts, and how
Oh
you don't
yeah.
do that.
No.
Y'all watch the podcast or listen to the podcast episode, www.flourishinthe flourishintheforeign.com/episode/Lisa. Lisa, tell us about living a global lifestyle, your business and your services, and what you can offer
Sure.
everyone.
Sure. So, living a global lifestyle is a global branding community for expats, digital nomads, and global travelers. And I really developed it as I was developing. Well, I just started out writing a book years and too many years to count. But then people started, I realized, like you said at the beginning, people really need this information, especially the financial piece, because there's no, like I said, I was a banker and I banked this population. I've lived abroad. And most people who talk about living abroad and money, they only talk about taxes and maybe investments. There's a whole lot between that. So that's how I started the seminars. And I've been a little lax in that. Like I said, I've got some other issues, but I've been doing a lot of Clubhouse, and people have asked me to speak at conferences, so I've been doing a lot of that. You can check me out on my website. You can join my group, please, on Facebook, and I'll give Christine all the links. I would say for anybody in between since it was taking a long time to finish the book, I've created a workbook, and that really came out of people asking me about a budget, asking me about, and me talking about a financial blueprint. I'll give Christine the link. You can get that. If you take any of the financial classes, I'm doing one in June, July, and August. Usually they're at the end of the month. By the weekend, I'll send Christine the links for them. You get the workbook included. And it really is a nice roadmap that takes you from pre-departure, arrival, and then repatriation. Has a bunch of checklists in there. It has some budgets in there. It has a lot of resources. I've given a couple of resources, but in terms of bank accounts, investment people, tax people, it gives a pre-departure checklist. I have another pre-departure checklist I developed. It's a lot of pages, so I've got to figure out how I'm going to dole that out. And I hope to keep doing great stuff like this podcast and getting in front of as many people. A lot of folks have invited me to Clubhouse if anybody's on Clubhouse, and that's been really, really good because then I can reach a lot of people. And I enjoy doing the seminars. I just, I do one free one, which is just everything you want to know about living abroad. And then I do a paid one because that's about the financial, but I go into detail from soup to nuts about everything you need to know. And the feedback from that is good. And those are good. It's just, of course, trying to reach the masses to do it. And I try and do it usually the last week of the month. So that's what I do. My next thing I'm going to be doing, as you mentioned, I'm blockchain certified. I'm really, really interested. I mean, the whole world has changed, right? And in like the last 8 to 10 years, and how blockchain and digital technology and finances surface. So I'm hoping to get on some projects and do some stuff with that because I think that will be also important. Something we didn't mention, one of the things people go, well, should you use an ATM? Has anybody realized the whole world is going cashless? A lot. You can't even be. I just sorry, influencer, trying to be nice, wrote a whole article about ATMs and fees, and somebody posted it, and I posted in a group. I said, "Do you realize some countries don't even have ATM? Sweden has gone almost cashless. China, they have their own digital currency. I was in China before COVID. I lived in Shanghai. I've been going to China for almost 20 years. I could only find one ATM in the airport.
Yeah.
Okay. And I didn't have a choice, but I was standing there going, oh, should I use the ATM? Or should I exchange my? Then I'm like, Lisa, you're breaking all your own rules. Just exchange money. Right. And then praying that someone, taxi driver, took cash because they don't take cash anymore. So the whole world is changing. And I think I can add value to that. So I want to be involved in that. So, Christine, thank you. I know we've run over time, but we could talk about this for days.
I
Hope
know
we
we
can
could
get
talk about
together.
this.
I wish I knew you were in Atlanta. I would,
Yeah, I had to come quite unexpectedly, but Lisa, you're always, always invited to come and chat on any of my platforms because
Okay.
your information is so, so vital. And like we talked about before, there's just not enough people talking about it. There
No,
surely is enough Black women with expertise talking about it, and
thank
we
you.
really need this information because it's not about being abroad, it's about thriving abroad.
I
And
love
part
how
of
you always say that. I love it.
yeah, and
I love
part of cultivating a life well lived is how are you going to sustain that life and what does that look like? And though there's some things that have caused us anxiety in the past and we are fearful of, we have to really look at this stuff head on, because this is how we are going to create the life of our dreams. It just is what it is. And so I really appreciate your information. Whenever you want to come back, you let me know when your
I'm gonna
book
hold
is
you to
ready. I mean, we could do another chat just on blockchain if you want, because I
Oh,
think it's
we
so
could do it.
important.
Yeah, we could do on crypto. Yeah,
Yeah, on
we
crypto,
should
because that's a huge thing that I have a
yeah,
lot of people talking
we
to.
should do one on like yeah, I will definitely like digital. I'm also going to be doing I want to do this clubhouse on insurance. Actually, I'm putting it together. I would definitely love to include you because you're living in a country where it's like the insurance and what you said is important. It's just not that many hours in a day. But if we could do that this summer, that'd be good. Like July or
Yeah,
you're
you
right.
let me
Yeah.
know. I would love to do a financial wellness series with you for
Oh, that
sure,
would be a good
because
idea.
it is just so vital. And it's so, I know that a lot of people are overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed in the States. And so they're like, what? I have to still think about this abroad, which I think is why they don't want to think about it. They're like, I don't want to think about it. I just want to live and be cheap. And I'm like, you want to think about it,
You
and
said
you
it.
and you want to be able to leverage this, the geo arbitrage in a way that works for you. You want to be able to leverage these, social safety nets that you'll have access to your
Mm,
benefit. But you have to go with your eyes wide open. You can't be afraid. You
yeah.
can't avoid. You have to do it, because life still happens even when you're abroad. Everybody
Yeah.
knows that people die. Everything still happens when you're abroad.
You know you're preaching to hey you're preaching to the converted, right? Everybody know. I mean, I lived abroad the last time. I was only there 5 months and I got sick. Right. Luckily, I'd been to Shanghai a bunch of times. And something else I know you've talked about, I had built a community, so I even knew where the hospital was, right? Knew that. And like I said, with the health and insurance, we really, people, I went to international business school, so I know tons of people, a lot of people get sick abroad. Nobody talks about it.
Yes.
No one talks about it. It's again, it's like, oh, we don't want to talk about that. That's bad. You go into these countries that are developing and emerging, which is why they're cheaper. I'm not going to say cheap, um, and also huge populations. I mean, I'm a native New Yorker. Was this 8 million people? There's 27 million people in Shanghai. Some of these other, and that's something I look at now. I am a city person, but you have to, and if you have to work every day and live every day, and you're living a lot of people experience illness, and we've seen Christina, unfortunately, in the expat community, a couple of people have gotten sick and with COVID and stuff.
Yeah.
It's something people don't want to think about. Hospital, what? Well, I'm not going to budget for that. What? Insurance?
Yeah.
Why do I need insurance? What? I might not
It's
get.
not all coconut drinking and being on a hammock. I don't know why.
No.
It's not
Yeah,
all that.
and I've seen you talk about it. Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know what. I even used to say this when I was working for my global company. I could do another series. Well, I do. I have an article coming about what are the top financial things I learned about working abroad. And there's your paycheck. There's problems, and it's all. I go. We are here. We're king. I need my. I'm yes. I may have other resources, which is not your business. I am here working. I need to live on this income, so
Yeah.
it needs to be correct every month. Telling me, oh, wait till next month, and all expats are rich and you have money. Where are you getting that from? That's not true. Even if it were true, I'm working, I'm providing a service, and our contract says that you must pay me. But you're right. The whole hammock kind of, I see a lot of people in some of these groups. Well, I want to be financially independent, and I only, even remote work, we could do a whole series on that, is not that easy. And I see a lot of people who are not, and I'm sure you could talk about this. Countries we're already becoming sensitive to that.
Yeah.
They were already asking questions like, do you have your company's permission to work here? And a lot of people don't know how to answer that question. I see this on Facebook a lot. And I'm like, well, have you checked with your company to see that they have a remote work policy? And they go like, what are you talking about? I'm
Yeah,
like,
because you're opening up your company to tax liability.
that's right.
And
And other liability. Well, other countries take care of their employees, and they have
yeah,
rules and regulations about operate. And I've opened when I was a banker. I've got licenses in other countries. It's not easy. You can't just pick up your computer and hope that your boss or colleague doesn't hear the palm trees waving in the background and doesn't notice your IP. And with all this hacking going on, you think your company's not going to realize your IP address is not where it's supposed to be? And
yeah,
that's if nothing bad happens. If something bad happens to you, and that could be you getting robbed or meeting the wrong people or anything, and the police start to ask questions. I think people, that's a whole other course too about, or well, I do mention it when I talk my seminar about, what could happen, what happens with the police. The police are not always your friends, or that you don't have the same rules and regulations. People don't realize that. Um,
no. I mean, only
and what
look
the
to
embassy,
Japan.
right,
You
or exactly, or what the embassy can and can't do for you.
Oh, that's a whole conversation because people literally don't understand what the embassy does, and the embassy doesn't do nearly what people think that they do.
No,
They
you're
are
right.
not coming for
You're
you.
right. Oh, you only have to look at like also COVID and other countries. Germany was like, we've put what umpty up $1 million to get our people on. The U.S. was like, well, here's your promissory note. Here's your promissory
Yes.
note. And that was only, and also going to get people was only after a lot of pressure, right? From people calling, my family members are stuck in this country. Are you sending a plane for them? What are you doing? How are you helping them? Remember, that was only after a lot of pressure. But I agree with you. I mean, I mean, I could go on wax ages about that, and that's something else people need to prep for.
Yeah.
If I get into trouble, what can the embassy do for me, or what they can't do for me. What they're allowed. One of those companies that does repatriation of remains, and this I didn't know, they had a disclaimer on their website during COVID saying, I guess people thought that during COVID they could come and, evacuate them. And they're like, the borders are closed, these countries are closed. We need their permission to come in. I thought that was interesting. Yeah. We can
This is
talk
why
more.
planning is so crucial. But we will be in touch because I would love to do a series with you because it's so,
Oh,
so
that'd be
crucial.
great. The wellness. I like that, Christine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that offline. You're always so gracious. You're always so kind. I definitely want to do something with you and help you. It's just, sometimes there are not enough hours in the day, but you're always on point. I'm always available. You can always just shout out to me and go, hey, your viewers are always so great. When we'll talk offline about something else I want to broach to you, and you let me know if it's good. But I like the idea of a financial wellness series. That's cool.
Definitely. We'll talk about it offline. But I just wanted to thank you for joining us and thank the watchers that were watching us throughout this. You guys didn't leave any questions, but that's okay. You can leave questions after or during the replay. I will collect them. I will take them to Lisa. She's gonna give me her links. I'll put them in the description. And maybe some of these questions will actually spur the next session that we have. So definitely leave your questions, your concerns, anything that you feel in the comment section wherever you are watching. Thank you guys so much for watching today. Please make sure that if you're watching on YouTube or Twitch or Twitter, make sure that you have followed me or liked and subscribed and all of those good things. And make sure that you have been you've been listening to the podcast Flourish in the Foreign. Rate and review. Support the podcast at www.flourishintheforeign.com/support via Cash App, Patreon, buy me a coffee, all of those great things if you have found some value in today. All right. Thank you all so much. I will see you soon. Bye.